Hi, my name is Pam Aylward, and today I'm going to touch on a topic that I tend to keep to myself for the most part. It's hard to believe at times how much our lives have been impacted by COVID-19. There's so much misinformation out there and censorship that I really hope you're taking it all in and not limiting yourself to just using mainstream media as your source for information. I'm not here to wake anyone up or judge you. If you've been vaccinated or considering it, I fully stand behind it being your choice, and I hope you weren't coerced or forced into that decision. I happen to be one of those people out there whose immune system is compromised. For the past 32 years, I've learned to pay close attention to my body and supplement my immune system as needed. It's just a given that when I notice any sign of feeling run down, I slow down. I rest. I watch what I'm putting into my body. And most importantly, I de-stress. There are very healthy people who are somehow genetically predisposed to their immune system overreacting to a trigger like an immunization, surgery, childbirth in some cases, a virus, which could be as simple as a common cold, vaccination, flu shot, bacteria, you name it. It's somewhat unknown exactly how it happens, but we're out there. And when it happens to you, it's reminiscent of a horror movie, to say the least. Have you heard of Guillain-Barré Syndrome? Not many people have, unless they know someone who's fighting for their life or survived it. It's said to be a rare autoimmune response that affects approximately 1 to 2 out of 100,000 people each year. Rare indeed. In my research to see if my GBS could possibly be re-triggered by the COVID-19 vaccine, I've noticed conflicting information. Some sources say that I shouldn't hesitate because my chances of having complications from COVID are much greater than the risk of GBS recurring. However, if you Google Guillain-Barré syndrome and COVID-19 vaccine, you'll find that at least 100 people have been diagnosed with GBS as a direct result of having the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. At least they're admitting that. Yes, it's a small number, but the way GBS is described is nothing like how it's experienced. 32 years ago, I was a healthy, active 17-year-old in grade 11 in a northern Canadian city called Whitehorse, Yukon. I was going to swimming lessons after school to become a lifeguard. I really enjoyed running long distance, cross country and downhill skiing, skidooing and four-wheeling with my friends, when my life took a dramatic turn on March 11th, 1989. I'd been fighting a stubborn common cold, and like a typical teenager, I was not slowing down. I was going to Mexico and Palm Springs for spring break with my father and stepmom, and I was a sun worshiper, determined to rock my bikini and come back home with a nice tan. Before we even landed in Mexico, I noticed on the flight that my toes felt numb and tingly. I didn't think much of it at the time because it was a cold day in Whitehorse, and I was wearing a pair of open-toe sandals for the trip. However, each day I started noticing how exhausted I felt, and I realized the numbness in my toes wasn't getting any better, but actually getting worse. Walking on the beach barefoot felt different. My feet felt heavy. I noticed it was starting to get more and more difficult to put clips or elastics in my hair. And even brushing my teeth was challenging because my fingers felt weak and tingly. Even the muscles in my neck and shoulders felt really tight when stretching my arms above my head. I finally said something to my parents when we arrived in Palm Springs about a week and a half later, because it was starting to kind of freak me out. Why were these weird symptoms not going away and getting worse? I now was also fighting flu-like symptoms and knew something wasn't right. They took me to a doctor and he dismissed my symptoms because my reflexes were still normal at that point. He pulled my parents aside and told them I was most likely trying to sabotage the vacation so I could return home to see my friends. The next day, I was even weaker and my balance was impaired. Thankfully, my parents didn't like what they were seeing and we headed back to Canada. I held on to my dad's arm for balance and momentum to walk onto the short flight, but only hours later, I had to be wheeled off of the plane in a wheelchair. We immediately went to the hospital closest to the airport, which was Richmond General, and I was diagnosed a few hours later with a spinal tap. I was transferred to UBC Hospital because a neurologist there had experience with this rare condition. I was still able to sit up in bed, go to the washroom unattended, but I had absolutely no appetite for food and distinctly remember watching the clock fairly closely for my next Tylenol dosage to ease that deep ache in my body. It was always such a relief to swallow that little bit of liquid Tylenol, and the nurses seemed to know I needed to wash down the liquid with a chaser of water. Until a nurse I hadn't met yet handed me my Tylenol and didn't know what I needed when I desperately asked for water while choking on the liquid Tylenol. All hell broke loose, and I was rushed into an emergency room with medical staff telling me to not resist the tube they were forcing down my throat. Next, I hear, "Let the machine breathe for you. Stop breathing." Things went fuzzy after that, but I then woke up in the emergency room of Vancouver General Hospital, completely paralyzed head to toe, not able to speak because I have a ventilator breathing for me. Apparently, VGH had a treatment called Plasmapheresis, which was my best chance to stop the Guillain-Barré from attacking my nerves any further. The pain was excruciating. My nerves were on fire, and the only relief I could get was with morphine, and I was temporarily put on Laratine, which is a medication given to burn victims. I remember trying to describe the sensation to a nurse, and this is later on, not while it was ventilated, but I described it as if the muscles and bones in my limbs were exposed to the air without any skin. You couldn't pay me to relive that kind of pain again. My eyes had to be lubricated to keep them from drying out because I no longer had any control of any of my muscles. Luckily, I was on the ventilator for less than 2 weeks before I could breathe on my own again. I rapidly lost weight and had to have a feeding tube inserted through my nasal cavity to my stomach. Each and every time the feeding process began, I would get very nauseated. And sometimes it was so bad that my food would come up, much to everyone's disappointment, as I was rapidly wasting away to skeletal status. And I was a tall girl. I was almost 6 foot, down to probably 98 pounds. It took 5 months for me to eat food properly again. I had quite a severe aversion to even the scent of food. None of my favorites could entice me. But thankfully, a nutritionist at GF Strong Rehabilitation Center finally kickstarted my appetite with fresh fruit and cottage cheese. It was a long, painful journey, but I took my first steps 7 months later on October 31st. From that point on, milestones propelled me one after another until I was finally ready to go home. 1 month shy of an entire year. I was an 18-year-old walking with a cane, and I had to hold my pen with both hands to write at first. It was humbling. Thankfully, I can use my hands fully. I just can't extend my fingers like most people. So a lot of people sometimes ask, do you have arthritis? Thankfully, I don't, not yet anyway. And from the knees down, I do have permanent nerve damage. My nerves from the knees down were damaged so badly that I use AFOs, or ankle foot orthotics, because I have severe drop foot. I just want to add that to look at me, you wouldn't know what I've been through, just like anybody else, really, right? We all have a story. But I really want to address anyone who is currently battling GBS and anyone who is supporting them. I hope that you fight. I know it's hard. It's extremely painful. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. But it does get better. You'll be getting better slowly. Fight for your life. I distinctly remember one night in the ICU where I am pretty sure I should have passed away. But I had my life to live. So I fought. You can do it. It's worth it. There's so much more to my story than what I've just shared, but to keep this video as short as possible, I promise to share more in a future video. I hope that you make your decisions based on facts, lots of research and thought, and what you feel in your heart is best for you and your family. I know it can be hard and scary to stand against the grain, but the human race has experienced similar agendas in our history. It's my sincere hope for all of us that we can be more respectful and understanding of our choices. Thank you for watching. Till next time, take care.